So this video is just going to show you a little bit about how to shade using the collage method. So as you can see, I have just a simple sphere drawn here, and that's just going to provide you with an example of taking a form and applying shading using bits and pieces of torn out magazine. So as you can see, my sphere is labeled, well, not labeled, but it's marked. So I've got my light source here, which then means that my highlight will go here. I'll have midtones all around it. This is sort of my halfway point. And then this part would be my core shadow, which is the darkest part of a shaded form. And then this part would be my reflected light, which is the light that kind of comes around that form to show the depth. And then this is my cast shadow. So the first thing that you'll be doing, like for instance on my pear example for the 331, the first thing I would do would be to look for different magazine colors that I need. So the pear is green. So what I would be doing would be looking for different tints and tones and shades of green. So just different values and types of green. I'd cut them out, tear them out, and then I would trim them down to where I just have the green on the page. So I've already done that with blue for this particular sphere. So I've got some big just chunks of a bunch of different types of blue. So then the next thing I'm going to do is just figure out sort of what shape I want to use. Because quite frankly, this is obviously too big to use. So you can use a triangle, you can use a square, you can use some sort of weird shape. Some people use a hole punch to create sort of very even circles. It's completely up to you. I tend to just cut random shapes. So I'm just going to go ahead and trim some of these into some smaller shapes. They end up being sort of triangular. But one thing to remember is that I can still alter the shape if I need to. Like if I need to make it smaller, or if I need to cut part of it off so that it fits better into a space. All I'm really doing right now is sort of like painting. I'm mark making, except I'm mark making with shapes. So I'm going to stop cutting on that piece because this is all that very dark blue, which might be either my cast shadow or my core shadow. And keep in mind that just like when we are painting, we want to work from the back up. So I would do my cast shadow first, and then I would work into my reflected light, and then my core shadow, the midtones, and then the highlight would be the very last thing that I would do. So I think that this is probably going to end up being part of my core shadow. So I'm just going to go ahead and see if it would be approximately what I need by laying some of it down. I'm not going to glue any of it yet. I'm just kind of putting it into place. And I'm going to do that for basically the whole thing before I glue any of it. So some of these pieces are a little tricky to pick up. And remember, it's not going to be perfect, especially at this point, because this point is really just kind of measuring out what I'm going to be needing. I don't even know necessarily if where I'm putting things is where they're going to end up. So the next thing I might do would be to look for sort of that next value of blue, which might be more along these lines, or perhaps this one. Yeah, let's go with this one. And I'm just going to cut that one into smaller sections. Notice that I skipped my cast shadow for now because I'm not sure if I want to do it with blue or a different color. But because I'm not gluing anything down yet, that's okay. If I were gluing down, I would absolutely start with my core shadow. So here I'm just going to kind of overlap a little bit of that core shadow with this slightly lighter blue. And it's not much lighter, but it's lighter enough that it starts to get me into the shading aspect of this project. And one thing that can help make this a little bit easier is if you have like a little cup of water nearby, you can dip your finger in the water just to have your fingers be a little bit wet. It'll make the pieces a little easier to pick up. So now I'm ready to go ahead and move into the next value. Going to be just a little bit lighter than this one. So we're going to slide those off. Look for something just a little lighter. That's a little too much the same value. That might be a good bet. The darker part of the sky, not this lighter part. I'm going to save that lighter part for once I get more towards some of my lighter midtones and even into the highlights. So I'm going to cut these pieces just a little bit larger. And again, the shape, the size, all of those things that you cut are kind of up to you and also partly determined by how big the thing is that you are working on. So for instance, this sphere is relatively small. So none of my pieces are going to be super big. So as I'm laying these down, I do feel like I might need a bit more of an in-between value, but I'm going to go ahead and lay them down for now, just to kind of get a feel for it. And hopefully this is also helping you to start to see how the shading happens. And right now there are little white gaps where the paper is showing through the magazine clipping, which will not be there once I'm starting to glue things down. Because once I get to the gluing down step, at that point, I know that things are pretty well established and I've got things pretty much where they need to be. So I'm going to go ahead and cut some more of this section now, getting into some of those lighter values. Again, I'm going to cut these a little bit larger than I did on the shadow because the mid-tone section of my sphere is larger than the core shadow section. So we're going to make sure I avoid that lightest section because I'm not at the highlight yet. And then I'm just going to go ahead and lay these down. So there's a lot of placement figuring out with this particular type of shading. It's the same concept as regular shading, but there's a little more thought and planning put into it.
Make sure.
So then once again, as I continue to build up these layers, you can see that it's getting a little bit lighter as I go. And now I would be ready to probably go ahead and start cutting some pretty light blue out to go into that next section that's sort of right around the highlight section. So again, I'm going to go ahead and cut these a little bit larger than I did on the shadows. Keeping in mind that I can always trim them down even more if I need to. So I'm going to go ahead and lay some of those lighter blue sections on. So you can see that this is a slightly different type of blue, and that's okay. Not every single blue is going to be the exact same type of blue, or any other color for that matter that you work with. You're going to have a little bit of variety in there, but with this type of shading, that is perfectly fine. So you can see that I'm definitely starting to get lighter and lighter and then move towards that highlight. So hopefully some of the form aspect is now coming across because the shape does have depth now. Just going to go ahead and wrap this lighter section up a little bit around where the highlight's going to go. And then remember, I'm going to be putting the highlight directly on top of that. So it's okay at this point if I cover a little bit of that side of my sphere because the highlight can go directly over that. So now I'm going to go ahead and cut some of this very, very light blue for that section right before the highlight. And then my highlight will be white. So I would want to then cut some magazine pieces that are white to go right on top of that. And quite frankly, if I wanted to cut a magazine piece that was white literally into a circle and put it on there that was the right size, that would be an absolutely okay choice for something like this. So one thing to remember when you are shading in the collage style is that you're going to have to go a little bit back and forth. You're going to have to find different colors and different bits of magazine even as you are working in the process of gluing things down. So now that particular little bit would just be ready for me to add the white part that is going to be the highlight there. So let me go grab a magazine and just cut out a circle that is white and put it on there and make sure that it is the right size. So here I've got my white magazine. I think I tore 2 pages. Shocking. I'm just going to cut a little snippet out. And then I could actually draw the size circle I need, or I could just eyeball it and trim it as needed. And remember, you don't necessarily even have to use a circle for your highlight. You do, however, want to look at whatever it is that you are shading and see if it needs to be a circle or something else. And then at that point, I feel like that's not quite bright enough in terms of white. So what I could do would be to just cut another circle out of maybe a whiter section. And this time I'm going to cut it just a little smaller. And then I would put that directly on top. So it will get a little bit lighter in terms of the highlight just through the layering process. And then I have to do my reflected light. And in order to do the reflected light, I'm just going to use about one of these 2 mid-tone values. So I might just cut some pieces of this bit for the reflected light there. And then I would be ready to go ahead and figure out what color I want to use for my cast shadow. And then once I have everything cut, I could go ahead and start gluing things down.